All right, I will say good evening. Let us begin. So we are continuing tonight. The Meretz Hashem, actually, we're going to finish tonight in the Malacha of Zoreya. So tonight, there's two. You'll see the Mar Mekomos, the source packet tonight is really comprised of two things. The first 6 sources are Zoreya part 3. Then the Meretz Hashem, we're going to begin the Malacha of Kotzer tonight as us. Remember again, last week I left you off on quite a cliffhanger. The sukkah shlak, who could barely sleep after such suspense. So remember again, we're speaking about the idea about the person has the cover, the tarp, the shlak on their sukkah. Now again, it rains, I want to remove it, but of course the issue with removing it is that any moisture will end up falling on the ground. So the shaila is, what are my options? So remember again, last week we spoke about option number 1, which is asking a guy to do it. Asking a Gentile to perform that particular action. And again, we spoke about the idea, we saw by Rav Moshe, that Allah l'maisa amira l'nachri by a psik reisha, especially by a psik reisha, ultimately again, de lo nechale, and especially a psik reisha l'dvar mitzvah, ultimately again is going to be permitted. Okay, so that was approach number 1. Remember again, we saw Rav Moshe by the refrigerator, which is a very important Rav Moshe to kind of keep in your back pocket. People need that Rav Moshe at different times. So now I want to continue with another approach. Actually, we're going to cover like 2 or 3 different approaches that we could have with the shlak. So take a look at number 1. Shmir Shabbos Hilchos deals with a very interesting case here. Case is like this: Kiyar asher hamayim nishpachim l'socho Zormim derech tzinor ad shemagiyim lekarka zerua. So this is actually interesting. So listen to the case. At first glance, it sounds something separate than what we have, but yeah, you'll see it has another sukkah application as well. Let's say you have a sink. Now the way this works in the sink is, imagine for a moment you wash your hands in the sink, so the water collects in a sink, it then goes down a drain, and then on the drain it empties onto the ground. So you can imagine this. They have like these like portable outdoor sinks. So if you can imagine, again, instead of being connected, it just simply pours out into the ground. So Shmir Shabbos Hilchos, so listen to this. Mutter litu adayim l'socha b'Shabbos. You're allowed to use that sink on Shabbos, right? Why? What's the pshat? V'chei mutter lishpoch bo mayim l'chol tzorach acher. Vein choshishin lashkias hazram shete'asa al yidei kach. Im amnam ein kavanaso eleha. So Shmir Shabbos Hilchos paskins that halacha l'maisa, this is called the grama. Again, it's not called the psik reisha. Why is it not called the psik reisha? Because remember again, the psik reisha requires really an instantaneous result. Right? So remember again, this is not instantaneous. There's a delay, and therefore, by definition, it falls into the category of grama. So as long as Shmir Shabbos Hilchos paskins, as long as I don't have kavana for the water to go onto the ground, then l'maisa, like to water anything, then l'maisa is going to be permitted. Amnam vaday she'asra lishpoch es hamayim alalu al zroim o makom zerua o natua acher gam im ein kavanaso kal lahashkos atzemach. Now, obviously, again, the one thing I have to be careful. Ultimately, again, is not to intentionally pour it there. So this is just an interesting idea over here. That now, again, what I'll point out over here is something very interesting. That remember, so in part 1, he's talking about over here pouring it into the sink, and then from the sink it goes onto the ground. In part 2, he's saying, Amnam vaday she'asra lishpoch es hamayim halalu ala zroim. That's talking about directly pouring the water onto the zram. In other words, what he's referring to over here is, don't confuse this and think that you could wash your hands over seeds or over a fertile ground. It's not my kavanah to water the seeds. It's not, remember, this will say, it's not a davar she'eino miskaveh. This is a grama. Now, I will point out to you that if you know that, it's interesting because Shmir Shabbos Hilchos makes it sound like you'd be totally permitted to use one of these outdoor sinks on Shabbos, even though the water is going to end up on the ground. So it seems to be conventional wisdom is that ideally not to use something like this. In other words, technically speaking, it's mutter, but it would seem to be that if one did not have to go ahead and rely on the fact that it's a grama, better not to. I'm just bringing this up because this opinion is brought down in the context of the shlak, of the sukkah cover, because the sukkah cover essentially is the same type of thing. The water falls on the cover, the cover is then removed, and when removing the cover, the water could fall onto the ground. So therefore, many compare it to this case of the outdoor sink, and therefore, because it's grama, technically it would be permitted. So according to the second approach, you'd be permitted to remove the shlak yourself. Right? No guy. All right? Option number one is the guy. Option number two is remove it yourself. But because it's grama, therefore it's not a problem. Okay, interesting idea. Number two and number three are really highlighting the same concept. They're just saying it a little bit differently. So number two is the Shalos Teshuvos part3, and number three is the Kaf HaChaim. So let's take a look at both of them, even though you're going to see they're really highlighting the same basic yesod. So number two, Imeshba Chafira Mayim Keshir Hashakas Hazroim Kol Shabbos. Ein Kan, I'm sorry, that's a misprint. It's supposed to be Ein Kan Iser Balsafas Hamayim La Chafira B'Shabbos. So the Hartzi says like this. So we'll say, so imagine for a moment, you have like a, you ever see sometimes, like you see this by trees sometimes, and there's like a little irrigation ditch around the tree, right? Where you go out and you fill it up with water. So what the Hartzi is dealing with is the following case. Imagine for a moment, before Shabbos, a person goes ahead and fills up that irrigation ditch, around the tree with water. So it's got more than enough water. On Shabbos, you then come along and pour more water into that irrigation ditch. The Har Tzvi says you have not violated Shabbos. Why? Because the plant already has everything it needs for now. In other words, you're not substantively adding everything. Now, we'll say this is presupposing you know how much the tree needs and it had exactly what it needs. So therefore, my adding of water is not doing anything. A fascinating idea. Even though I just want to point out that we saw before in last week's share, or maybe 2 weeks ago, that what's the share for Zoreya? What's the share for Zoreya? Right? Any amount. So intuitively, one would have thought that introducing any amount of water by definition is Zoreya. What the Har Tzvi is highlighting over here is if you see what he's saying is, if you know that the plant already has all the water that it needs, your additional water is halachically irrelevant and inconsequential, and therefore, by definition, is not a malacha. It's not a malacha. That's the Har Tzvi. Take a look at the Kaf HaChaim in number 3. Same basic idea. He says, if you have already given the particular tree or the particular plant all the water it needs before Shabbos, Shebiyom Shabbos atzmo hagai hishka osan mayim bichdei tzarkan. Or on Shabbos itself, the guy watered the plant, for everything that it needs. It's fully watered. B'shuv ba yisah b'hishka b'kavana mechuvenes la'osan atzmachim. And now a Jew comes along on Shabbos and waters the plant even more. Eino chayiv mishum zoreya. One is not chayiv because of zoreya. Why? Lefi sheriboy hamayim markivin umafsidin hatzmachim. So the Kaf HaChaim is still interesting. He says why? Because too much water is actually detrimental for the plant. So the Har Tzvi and the Kaf HaChaim are saying nuancedly different things, but the yesod is the same. The Har Tzvi says essentially, once a plant has been watered everything it needs, your additional watering is halachically inconsequential, meaningful, and irrelevant. Therefore, it's not the malacha. The Kaf HaChaim takes it a step further, and he says once it's been fully watered, watering it anymore could actually be detrimental. Now, listen, now why is all of this important? Because interestingly enough, the poskim bring down that it could very well be that, right? Let's go back to our sukkah case, right? It's sukkahs, right? It rained. So now I want to take off the cover of my sukkah, but now water is going to go onto the ground. So some poskim want to make the argument that what? Since it rained already, the ground has whatever it needs, and so the Maisa, my additional rain that's going to come off of the shlak, essentially is halachically inconsequential or irrelevant. So again, the challenge with that last approach is what? What's the challenge with that last approach? Right. So first of all, how do you know? And really, that would seem to really only work like in the aftermath of like a major rain, right? The storm where you could say like the ground is fully saturated. Less than that, I don't know. It would be a little bit hard to kind of narrow that down. But I would say, but kind of just pointing out, if you bring this all together, essentially what we have is like this. If a person does have a shlak, I'm sorry, there's one more approach. Take a look at number 4, I have to give credit to Yehuda Buchwalter because he WhatsApped me today, and I was intrigued. Not that I didn't believe him, but I was intrigued, and so I had to find a makkah for what I quoted by Sternhill. So Zech Tzadik Livracha. So I want to show you something interesting. Take a look at number 4. So quotes over here in the Shilas Chuvas Leiv Avram. So he quotes over here, Shemitzaded lahakel v'tama heter shalo. What's the logic why one could be makel to remove the shlak? Listen to this. Shehu bizman yomtiv desukis kvar kala ha'aviv v'azroim holchim ubalim v'have psik reisha delo nechale. Listen to this. This is fascinating. By the time Sukkot rolls around, and this is true like whatever climate you're in, it's really whatever climate you're in, the grass is done growing. Right? The grass is done growing. Although, again, what's interesting about this is that, I don't know, I still pay for grass cutting, even past Sukkot. So I don't know. It's hard for me to wrap my head around this a little bit, but okay, let's see it. This is by the time that ultimately, again, Sukkot comes, ultimate spring is over, and whatever's grown has grown, and Lamaisana, everything else is kind of beginning to die in nature. It says a psik reisha de lo nechale. Va'af leman damer da ostra psik reisha de lo nechale midrabanan miko makom bazeh the dilma kvar nisgadlu ha'asavim kol tzarcham v'shuv lo yosifu legidul have a safek psik reisha b'drabanan de mutter. So this is interesting. So the Leiv Avram says that by Sukkot time, essentially the grass has finished growing, right? And if anything, again, now it begins to diminish. So therefore, again, at most, it's a safek in a psik reisha. Maybe the water will cause something to grow, maybe it won't. So safek in a psik reisha midrabanan is going to be mutter. Okay, so like I said, I think it's a little bit complicated because Lemaisa, again, Sukkot falls out, Sukkot could fall out September, October, you could still be having your lawn mowed or mowing your lawn, still for some amount of time after that. But again, an interesting idea. So I'll say, so if we kind of bring this all together, it turns out that there are essentially, we'll call it 4 different approaches as to how one could remove the shlak off the sukkah. Number 1 is asking a guy. Right. Number 2, ultimately, is taking it off yourself and recognizing that any water that falls onto the ground is grama. Number 3, which is taking it off yourself and recognizing that any water that falls onto the ground either is not doing anything or maybe even is oversaturating because the earth is already wet. And number 4, the Leiv Avram, who says that ultimately by Sukkot time anyway, everything's pretty much stopped growing. So at most you have a safek and a psik reisha with Rabbanan.
So on the last topic, sir, you go back to that. I actually learned from someone who did master gardener that you should continue watering your trees and your plants even through the winter until after it's snow on the ground. Because it encourages the growth and it encourages to...
Interesting, to hold on to it. I don't know, maybe it's like a machlokias ha-gardeners? I don't know. Yeah, it seems the halacha definitely recognizes that like there's a certain point where it's no longer beneficial. Even if you don't go with detrimental, certain point where it's no longer beneficial. I don't know, maybe also different plants take in the moisture different ways. I don't know. All right, we'll say. So now, next question, next interesting topic. What happens if a person has automatic sprinkler system? Right? So again, you have the in-ground sprinklers, you have it on a timer, it goes on 7 days a week. Can you have your automatic sprinklers go on Shabbos? Going on Shabbos. So we'll say, so what would you say?
Your lights go on Shabbos.
Right? So bepashtos, it really shouldn't be a problem. In other words, both say, if you think about it, there is malacha happening in our homes all of the time on Shabbos, right? My lights are going on and off on Shabbos. You have a thermostat. Your heat's going on and off, your air conditioning is going off. You put up a cholent before Shabbos, right? We'll get to Hilchos Bishul. I can't wait to get to Bishul. It's going to be great. Right? So a couple of weeks. Emir Hashem. So you put up your cholent. We're going to see halacha l'maaseh. Your cholent doesn't have to be fully cooked at the onset of Shabbos, which means there's cooking happening on Shabbos. So bepashtos, having the sprinkler go on should be absolutely no different and should be permitted. So it's quoted in the name of Rav Moshe. And so I didn't put it on the sheet, but it's quoted in the name of Rav Moshe that although technically speaking it's permitted, one should not do it. Why not? Because of a topic that we're going to talk about. We actually covered it in Smichas Chaver a little bit. I think we covered it in Smichas Chaver at some point. The concept of Zelusa de Shabsa. Zelusa de Shabsa literally means the degradation of Shabbos, meaning that there are certain activities that halacha l'maisa, although they are technically permitted, they erode the general sanctity of Shabbos because they essentially make Shabbos look like every other day. Now, I don't mean uvda d'chol, right? Uvda d'chol is something also a little bit, which weekday activity. I'm not doing anything. But allowing certain things to occur. Well, so I give you a good example of this. Paradigmatic example. No, not paradigmatic. Good example of this. Are you allowed to set your dishwasher on a timer on Shabbos? Now, again, remember, are you allowed to load your dishwasher on Shabbos? Yeah. Excellent answer. So remember, the answer is a yes, just with a tiny little asterisk of just a caveat. Remember, loading your dishwasher is not a problem because the dishwasher essentially is a storage container, right? It's a storage container. So I don't want it on my counter. I'm just going to put it in my. The only time maybe there's an issue is potentially if normally you don't care that there's dishes on your counter, but you're preparing it for Matzah Shabbos, so that comes after Abdullah, you could just hit the button, it could go. Then maybe there's a hachana, a preparation issue. But I think most of us absolutely load our dishwashers on Shabbos just because it's nicer to get the dirty dishes. Can you set your, so assuming, let's say I put my stuff in the dishwasher, so I know I finish lunch normally at, or whatever, Shabbos dinner. I finish Shabbos dinner at 10 o'clock at night. And so again, I'm going to load up the dishwasher. It's going to go on at 11. Are you allowed to do that? I'm sorry? Well, so either whatever, either I'm not going to open it again, or whatever. You could go ahead. I'm sure you could play with the settings or different things like that. So we'll say. So interestingly enough, the answer should be technically yes. Like, in other words, right, that is a good Shabbos, right? So the answer should be technically yes. The post can bring down that we don't do that. Why? Because the act of running appliances on Shabbos is zelusa de Shabsa. Ultimately represents a degradation to Shabbos, especially things that make noise. Now I know, everything has a quiet mode and everything like that, right? But Lamaisa, the act of running appliances, this was, when we get to Bishul, a lot of great stuff coming up with Bishul, we're going to talk about the ability to set your coffee maker on a timer. To have fresh brewed coffee on Shabbos. Big heter Heinemann on this. But many of the poskim who don't like the heter, not because it's a problem of bishul, but once again, zelusa de shabsa. Coffee maker is actually probably even more problematic than your dishwasher, right? Why? Because lemaisa, number one, normally, coffee maker number one is loud. Number two, it's what's the word? Fragrant, aromatic, blissful. I don't know what that wafting smell is a pretty dramatic thing in the house. In any event, so I'll say. So the point over that Moshe makes is, although technically speaking, it would be permitted to set your sprinklers, we do not. I'm sorry. So I think with these kind of things, especially like if you're one of those fancy people with in-ground sprinklers, I think people know that those things are usually set on timers. So I think that's well known enough that people know the rights. The same way that if people see lights going on and off in your house, there's not really like a marasai. I think it's interesting. Rav Moshe doesn't bring down a marasai issue; he just brings down a zelusa de shabsa issue. All right, so we'll say our last topic in Hilchos Zoreya. Interesting, if somebody asked this last week, and I meant to put it in last week's share, but I only got to this week, is what happens if I have plants in my house, and the plants in my house are by the window. So now I have curtains on the window, so come Shabbos or blinds, I want to open up the blinds to let light into the house. Now, of course, again, when I'm opening the blinds also, the plants, right, are going to be the beneficiaries of the sunlight. So am I permitted to go ahead and do that or not? That's the shaila. So we'll say, in the Sefer Hilchos Shabbos, he brings us something very interesting. He actually has a very long, it's interesting how long the piece is on this. So I'm only going to quote to you two opinions. The first he quotes over here is the Har Tzvi. So if you take a look, he says, "Benogea imutar liftoach trisei chalonos o vilon bebais." Can you open up the shades, or can you open up a curtain? כדי שיזרח השמש לסוך החדר, ובכוונוסו כדי להאיר החדר, ולא להצמיח הפרחים והציצים על ידי זריחת השמש. Now, obviously, our question is predicated on the idea that what? What's the goal of opening the curtains? What's the goal? Light, right? Not to do anything for the plants. Obviously, if my kavanah is for the plants, that's going to be usher. But lamaisa, my kavanah is really not for the plants. My kavanah is just I want some natural light. So am I allowed to do that or not? So he quotes over here: "Kvar erichu poske zmanenu b'sheilazu ukein sheilazu nishal b'shal sechuvas har tzvi arachaim kuflam and gimel b'shesilim shenasu." So again, I'm going to skip to the bottom. Look at the last two lines in number 6. He quotes over here from the Har Tzvi, Mevor midvarov, Dimagidulim einam mamish etzel hachalon, mutter liftoach hatrisim. Avalim hemunachim mamish etzel hachalon, ein ze grama, v'alkein asur liftoach hatrisim. So the Har Tzvi makes an interesting distinction. He says it all depends on the position of the plants. Listen to this. Last two lines on source number 6 on the first page. He says everything depends on the positioning of the plants. Essentially, I'd see would say like this. If halacha l'maisa, the plants are right at the window, and therefore, again, when you go ahead and you open the shades, so the plants are right there getting the sunlight, he holds that it's asur. He holds that it's asur. However, he says if the plants are like a little bit removed, like let's say the plants are in the room, and maybe even they're in the direct, what's the right word, light trajectory, but they're not right at the window, then he says that it's mutter, he calls that grama. So an interesting distinction over here, dealing with the position of the plants. Yes?
You need them because it's sharp as cold? You need that light.
I'm sorry? Plants, right. So the truth is, you could move it. It's not really muktzah. It's not muktzah. So you'd be permitted to move it to begin with. Right? A plant. I'm sorry? The question is a potted plant like with dirt? Flowers are not muktzah, right? Flowers in water you can move off. A plant, a potted plant, is that muktzah? Panshas, it should be muktzah, a potted plant. Yeah, I don't know. All right, you're saying it's a basis for the dirt is us, or basis for the plant. I'd have to double check that, but I guess a panshas should be muktzah. I don't think you could call that sorech makomo, right? Because you don't need the space. You need the plant not to be there. Right? In other words, sorech gufo makomo means, now again, can you play a little bit? I don't think. Can you play a game over here and say I want to move my chair to the place where the plant is situated? I mean, you could, but we spoke about it in Hilchos Mokta. That's not really called tzorech makomo. I don't think that would be called tzorech gufa makomo. I don't think so. So that's the okay. So that's the Har Tzvi. So that's the Har Tzvi. The Har Tzvi is going to make that distinction ultimately between whether or not the plants are right by the window or a little bit more removed. They're both saying, now turn the page. This is a continuation of the same source. He quotes another opinion in here. He says, V'im kein lefiza. He quotes a couple of other different opinions, and according to this second school of thought, he says, V'im kein lefiza, yesh lomar binogea liftoach hatrisim kineged atzmach. And listen to this. This is actually fascinating svara. He says, you're allowed, so the second school of thought says, no, you could open the blinds. You could open the shade, even if the plant is right near the window. He says, why? This is actually fascinating. The oso gidul shepoel zrichas hashemesh hu muat ve'im kein ein lo chashivos melacha im ein kavanosa kisheposeach hatris b'shvil atzmachim. So this is actually interesting logic. He says, the growth, right, the benefit that the sunlight is going to give the plant when you open it up, right? So the second opinion says is so minimal. It's muat. Really, I think what he means is it's minimal, and it's not measurable. Minimal and not measurable. There, and combined with the fact that it's not my kavana, Therefore, he holds it would be mutter to go ahead and open the shades, even though the plants are right next to the window. Now, I will say, I do want to point out the tremendous chiddush in this. The chiddush in this is that, I'm sorry?
We said kosher.
Right. So remember, again, this kind of goes back that by Zoreya, there's no shear. The shear is a kol shehu. So I think though, it must be that according to this svara, while it's a kol shehu, it's a measurable kol shehu. In other words, even a kol shehu is still somewhat quantifiable. Because the sunlight coming into the plant in your house, it's muat and it's not measurable. So and it's not your kavana. Right? I want to be clear. Your kavanah is for the light, so you put that all together. He holds that halacha l'maisa. You can open the shades even if the plant is right there. And I will say this second approach actually seems to be the majority opinion. So halacha l'maisa, the way we are knowing on Shabbos is that if you have plants by the window, flowers by the window, and halacha l'maisa, again, even though during the week you open up the shades in order to give the plants light, on Shabbos, if your kavanah by opening up the shades is to go ahead and bring light into the room, ultimately, again, that is going to be permitted on Shabbos. Har tzvi, only if the plants are a little bit removed from the window. But again, it seems to be conventional wisdom is like the second approach, and therefore halacha l'maisa, as long as your kavanah is for light, you are totally fine. Yeah.
Would one, in order to be careful, be advised to remove the plant before Shabbos?
I don't think one is mukhli. A person who wants to exercise a midas chasidus, you can. I don't think there's anything like that. The majority opinion is like the second approach, that halacha l'maisa, because it's minimal and not measurable, and your kavanah is for the light, you're totally fine. All right, Tabosei Mazel Tov. That ends our discussion on the malacha of Zoreya. All right, 2 down, 37 to go. We got this. All right, excellent. So I'll say, Mazel Tov, welcome to Kotzer. So let us begin. So take a look at number 1. So again, most remember again, all roads lead back to this Mishnah Masech Shabbos. Avos Melachos Abraham Chaser Achos Hazoreya HaChoresh VaHaKotzer. So we'll say, so now we're up to Kotzer. Kotzer, literally translated, means to cut something down, reaping. Where was this done in the Mishkan? Where was this done in the Mishkan? What would you say? Where was it done in the Mishkan? So remember again, same thing what we've seen up. Really remember, Kotzer is in the same family as Zoreya, Choresh. So you're planting all of these herbs for dyes for the curtains of the Beis Hamikdash. So therefore, again, remember, obviously, after you plant it, you have to harvest it. You have to reap it. So that's Kotzer. Or again, remember, all of these things also appear where else? Where else? The creation of a lechem apanim, right? So again, you go ahead and you plant wheat. You have to go ahead and be kotzer. You have to go ahead and reap the wheat in order to make the lechem apanim. Good. Bosai comes number 3, and Rashi just points out what we just spoke about. Number 3, the Rambam gives us a definition. The definition is v'chola oker davar migidulav chayiv mishum kotzer. Bosai, here is our operating definition. Anytime that you uproot something from the place where it grows, that is called ketzira. That is called ketzira. Now, I'm going to go out of order to show you something interesting, quite fascinating, about how this malacha kind of makes sense. So obviously, again, what's going to be involved in the malacha of ketzira? So just simple examples, right? Pulling an apple off a tree, kotzer, right? Ripping a leaf off a tree, kotzer. Pulling up a blade of grass, weeds, flowers, right? Anything oker davar migidula, from where it grows. I'll show you something fascinating. Take a look. Take a look at number 6. I'm sorry?
Like a usable object or just like a branch?
No, it doesn't have to be even usable. In other words, you're walking, and just, sometimes people walk and they pull off a leaf or pull off of this. That's called kotzer. That's called kotzer. Take a look at, we'll say, number 6. Just to give you another interesting application of this. We'll come back to 4 in just a moment. 6. Asavim sha'alu al ozen hakli. So we'll say, literally translated, grass that grew on the handle of a utensil. Now, he doesn't really mean grass. What is he referring to over here? What is he referring to? Like moss. Moss. So moss that grows on a utensil, Melachos, from moisture. Chashuvim ki mechubarim lekarka v'atolshan chayiv. So Shabbos say this is no different than something else attached to the ground, and therefore halacha l'maisa, if you uproot it, you're chayiv. So Shabbos say it's really very interesting. See, even though again the moss doesn't grow from the utensil, right? The moss is going from the moisture that's settled on the utensil, but it's not like, remember again, I will say, if you peel off the moss from the utensil, it's not the pshat that like there's roots that go into the utensil. So what do you see from here? You see from here something very interesting, which is that the malacha of Kotzer doesn't necessarily need something to have roots into the item that it is growing from. It just requires it ultimately to go ahead and be attached. So the Mishnah Berurah brings down another example of this. He says, number 7, Kimo shamatzei bidali sheshuavim bo tamid. So again, you find like often you'll find moss growing on a bucket that's used to draw water, right? Shebo tamid shegdelin bo kimin pitrios. The other place where this comes out, I will say, is mushrooms. Mushrooms, right? So remember again, mushrooms do not grow from the ground, right? They grow attached to the ground. So what happens if someone goes out and picks a mushroom on Shabbos? There's no root. That's still called Kotzer. That's still called Kotzer. So even though, again, in our mind, on the paradigmatic examples of Kotzer, something that develops roots into the ground and you're uprooting it from where it grows, we see that even uprooting something from the place where it grows, even if it's not deriving its nutrients from that place where it grows, but it's growing on something, attached to something, detaching that item is called Kotzer. So we'll see some very interesting applications of that. Go back up to number 4. Another very interesting machlokes. So tonight I just want to show you this machlokes, but we'll have to see the applications of it in Meretz Hashem in next week's share. Take a look at number 4. Te'imim sheyavshu b'iveyen, v'chein ilan sheyavshu peirosav bo, hatolesh mehem b'Shabbos chayiv. So I will say this is an interesting case. What happens if you have fruit on a tree, but the fruit has dried up? The fruit has dried up, right? Or you just in general, you have a tree that's fruits dried up. So what's the halacha? If you pick off those fruits from the tree, ultimately again you're going to be chayiv. Af pi shehem ka'akurim le'inyan tuma. Now what's the novelty in that ruling? What's the novelty there? The novelty is, remember, is the fruit getting anything anymore from its attachment to the tree? Nothing. So what you see from here is the malacha of Kotzer applies even if there's no nourishment, right? Even if there's no nutrients being passed from the tree or from the ground ultimately to the item growing, the act of detaching something from the place where it grows is by definition the malacha of Ketzira. Now, so I just want to point out that the way the Shulchan Aruch frames the case of Osai is the tree is alive, the fruits have dried up. So in that case, again, the Shulchan Aruch paskins, removal of the fruits is a violation of the malacha of Ketzira. Take a look at number 5, the Ber Halacha. This is actually fascinating. Look what it says. Yesh plukta bein poskim. So Rabbi said there's a fundamental machlokes. What's fundamental machlokes? Yesh omrim shafilu yavshu aperos hein v'uktseyen v'chein hu adin yavesh ha'ilon afilu legamrei dahainu she'in gizo machlif afilu hachi chayiv kevan da'al koponim ha'ilon mechubar v'chein hu adin aperos tamim mechubaran be'ilon. So Kotzer the Rambam, the Magen Avram, the Nishmas Adam, who hold if the fruit and even if the tree dried up, it is still usher to detach dried fruits from that tree. Right? So the tree's dead, the fruit's dead, it doesn't make a difference. If they're attached, the act of removing something from the place where it grows, even though right now there's no transfer of nutrients, there's no vitality in the tree or in the plants, it's still going to be usher. That's the first school of thought. Watch this. The Harbi Post, it goes Rashi, Tosfos, the Rashba, the Rambam, Svirlei, the Lo Mechayiv Rak B'Yavshu Aperos V'Uktzein Adayin Lach. Ubaza efshar dechayiv afilu yitlosh mat min agufta priya yavesh o yavesh ha'ilon va'adayin gizo machlif aval im yavshu legamrei pater ala peros v'ala ilon kitlushin damyos. Well, so the second school of thought says if the tree is dried up, there is no longer any kind of issue. In other words, if the tree is dead, there is no malacha of Kotzer, ultimately, again, from going in and detaching items from it. Now, I will say he adds in over here something very interesting, which is, it could even be if the fruit itself is totally dried up, right, that there might also not be an issue of Kotzer. In order for there to be Kotzer, there has to be some amount of the fruit that has to still be vital. Okay, but we'll leave that on the side. Point over here is, fundamental machlokes about is there malacha of Kotzer when the tree is dead. So remember again, the Shulchan Aruch's case, Shulchan Aruch is telling me if the fruit is dried up, but the tree is alive, there's still the malach of Kotzer. The shaila is, if the tree is dried up, is there malach of Kotzer or not? First opinion says yes, as long as the items are attached, there is a malach of Kotzer. Second opinion says no. If the tree is dead, there is no longer any kind of malach of Ketzira. We're going to see that's going to play a role in Meretz Hashem in next week's shir. We'll see some applications of this principle. So we'll say, we now come to number 8. Our last source for this evening. And I will say, this halacha is going to probably be the dominant one in Hilchos Ketzira, because this halacha that we're going to see right now kind of opens the door for all of the Melachos midrabanan associated with Kotzer, for which there are many. In other words, the Doraisa is kind of like straightforward, right? You can't go ahead and detach something from the place where it grows, even if it doesn't have roots, even if it's just growing attached to that thing. Okay, so machlokes as to whether or not if the tree is dead, is there a melach of Ketzira? But look at number 8. Here we go. Ein olin bi'ilan. They both say you cannot go up in a tree. You can't climb a tree on Shabbos. Right? Bein lach, bein yavesh. Whether the tree ultimately is alive or the tree is dead. Ve'ein nit limbo. Ultimately, again, you can't hang things on the tree. Right? So you can't use the tree. So I shouldn't say use. You can't hang things on the tree. Right? Next. Ve'in mishtamshin b'mechuber lekarka klal. And the truth is, you can't really use the tree for anything. For that matter, you can't use anything that is attached to the ground on Shabbos. Okay? So again, the Shulchan Aruch's discussion begins ultimately again with the tree, but Lamaisa, if you notice, he extends it to anything that is mechuber lekarka. So I will say, now why is that? Why is, in other words, let's go through the list of what I have over here, right? I can't climb the tree. I can't hang things on the tree. And the truth is, I can't use the tree. So I will say, so just to understand, like just for illustrative purposes, right? When I'm not saying this is true or not, we're going to deal with this next week. I can't hang up a hammock, right? Between two trees, and I can't go on that hammock on Shabbos. Because the act of going on the hammock, by definition, utilizes trees. My kids have a treehouse; they can't go up into the treehouse on Shabbos. Right? I can't go ahead and it's warm. I'm not sitting outside. I want to hang my jacket on a branch on the tree. I'm not allowed to do that. There's no usage of a tree on Shabbos. What's the pshat? So the Shulchan Aruch says in number 8, Gzeira shemeyala v'yitlosh. What's the concern? The concern is lest you come to go ahead and detach a branch from the tree. So I will say, so this is a gzeira midrabanon. So now again, these things begin to make sense. You can't climb the tree. You may end up going ahead and taking off a branch. You can't hang something on the tree. You may end up snapping a branch. You can't use the tree in any way, because once again, you may end up detaching a branch. And the act of detaching a branch, by definition, will be kotzer.
Would that include sitting under it for shade?
Oh, so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk. Bepashtus not. Bepashtus, when it says mishtamshin sounds like what it really means is active usage with the tree in some way. Sitting underneath its shade where I'm not physically interacting with the tree would not seem to be a problem. But we'll talk. Take a look at number 9. I will say last source for tonight. Mishnah Berurah comments on this. He says, number 9, Shemiyala v'yitlosh, because maybe you'll ascend the tree and ultimately again detach a branch. Alim o anofim o peros v'yiskavein litalsham v'asi lidei chiyuv chatos. That will say, so again, ultimately, what are we concerned about? We're concerned that ultimately, again, you're going to come to go ahead and inadvertently detach branches or leaves or fruit, and ultimately, again, come to a chiyuv chatos. So we'll say, we're going to see, yes?
What if a tree doesn't have branches?
It would be a low plug. It'll be a low plug. Although right, like anything else you find like in Hilchos Shabbos, the rule has to extend, in all cases. So we'll say what we're going to see what's really unique about this, and it's going to be one of the unique features over here is how dramatic and widespread this one rabbinic halacha becomes. So just to give you for illustrative purposes, how it even goes into non-tree related things. Let's say it has to do with using animals on Shabbos, right? Leaving aside the Shvisa Shabbos issue, but the concern ultimately, again, of riding an animal that you may come to go ahead and detach a stick in order to go ahead and hit the animal to move it. So, which is interesting, right? Because the act of riding the animal is not directly related to the malach of Ketzira. But ultimately, again, so we see that Chazal took a very wide-angle approach. All right, we'll say, so first of all, Mazel Tov on finishing Zoreya. Literally, again, 2 malachas down. Mazel Tov on beginning Ketzira. We'll stop over here for tonight. And in Meretz Hashem, we will continue with Kotzer and Meretz Hashem next week. Ahmed Yomi will begin in Meretz Hashem in just a few minutes. Shkayach, I will say. Also, if anyone is interested in joining the rotation for the Chazar notes, please see Rav Ari Lichterman. He's looking for a few good men.
What's the difference in grass? If anyone planted on the grass, it could be the same as a tree. It would be colorless grass a lot.
I think because it's low efshar. What are you going to tell people? They can't walk on grass on Shabbos? No grass?